Hi, I'm Feng, and in this video, we're gonna find the fastest way to start a sourdough starter. In order to start a starter the fastest way, we're gonna try two methods. One is with rye flour and water, because we know that the extra amylase in rye flour will give us a head start as compared to using white flour. I'll be showing you how to change your rye flour starter to a white flour starter later if that's what you actually want to end up with, but the fastest way to start a starter is with rye flour. And then the second method that we're going to try is using rye flour and pineapple juice. Dink. To start our starters, we're going to take 2 straight-edged glass jars. We want straight edges because it'll allow us to watch the growth of our starter with lids, so that we can cover our starter when they are doing their magic. We're gonna start with our water rye combo. We're just going to weigh out 25 grams into this jar. There we go. And then to that, we're gonna add 25 grams of flour. So we're basically adding 25 grams of both water and flour to this starter every day for 7 days. Oop, 51. It's fine. That's another thing about starters. You don't have to be precise down to the gram because we're trying to create a living organism and it's actually pretty forgiving. First myth busted, you have to be very precise with measuring your starter. It's not true. So we're just gonna stir that in to incorporate. And basically what a starter is this mixture of flour and water that wild yeast that's just in the air everywhere move into and build a home in. And then that's what leavens our pizza later. So once we've incorporated that, we're just gonna put a lid on because we don't want this to dry out. We're gonna use this aqua rubber band to just kind of measure the height of that. So that's our rye and water starter. Next, we're gonna do our rye and pineapple juice starter. So this is unsweetened pineapple juice. We just want 100% pineapple juice. And the theory about this is that the extra sugars and enzymes in pineapple juice are supposed to give the starter a boost. So let's see. We've got 25 grams measured out of the pineapple juice. And to that, I'm gonna add 25 grams of rye flour. This is a 1 liter weck jar. And the reason why we're using such a large jar is so that we only discard once, because a lot of recipes have you discard every day. Busting myth 2, we don't need to discard every day to start a starter. Ooh, smells good. If you want to be reminded of the beach or vacations, pina coladas, like this might be the starter for you. And to this one, we're going to add the yellow band for the pineapple juice starter. Now we're just gonna leave these to develop for 24 hours before we give them their first feeding. If you live somewhere warm, just leave them out at room temperature. But if you live somewhere colder, place it in the warmest part of your house, or you can use an oven with just the light on and oven door closed to create a warm environment to incubate your starter in. So it's day 2 and we're gonna give our starters their first feeding. This is our rye water starter. So to that, we're gonna add 25 grams of water again. I actually like to stir to incorporate. It's just a lot easier. So we've loosened up the starter with the water, which is how you would feed it normally after it's established. Once that's nicely incorporated, then it's time to add 25 grams of rye flour. And then once you have 25 grams of rye flour in there, then you stir to incorporate that again. If you feel like it, you can kind of watch your starter through the day to see if there's changes in volume. You might see some bubbles. It's really cool to see it come to life right before your eyes. This is now incorporated and I'm just gonna use the spatula to level it out. We're not wasting any of the home for our starter to establish. Every time we feed the starter, we're just gonna adjust the rubber band to meet the level it's coming up to. And then we cover it and we do the same for 7 days. And over the 7 days, you're gonna see the starter come to life. Starting with 25 grams of pineapple juice. All right. And we're gonna stir that in again until it forms an even paste. again, 25 grams of rye flour. Stir it in. All right, we're gonna cover this again, and we're gonna leave them for another 24 hours before we come back and we give them another feeding. You don't wanna feed them too often, which is why we're just feeding them once a day, because if you feed it more often than that, you're just diluting the colony before it's established. So we're gonna keep feeding them for 5 days. See you after that. So it's been 7 days since we started these starters, and it's been quite a ride. At the start of the week, the rye pineapple starter was in the lead, showing a lot more activity. But then towards the second half of the week, our rye water starter kind of caught up and took the lead. I think the only way we're gonna find out which way of starting a starter is the best is to make some pizza with them. And I'm gonna show you how to give them a feeding and use your starter from now on as normal. If your starter isn't behaving and isn't showing signs of life by day 7, don't worry, we got you. Stick around until the end of the video and we're gonna cover all the troubleshooting scenarios, everything you need to get a starter that's feisty. From this point on, now that your starters are established, you only need to feed it when you need it. And since we're making pizza dough with these, I'm gonna show you how. I'm gonna demonstrate with the rye and water starter. In order to reduce the amount of discard we get each time we make pizza dough, we're only going to make enough starter needed for the recipe, plus a little bit extra as a seed for the next time you make pizza dough. For this, we're gonna use my sourdough pizza dough recipe, which you can find over here. That calls for 30 grams of starter in the dough. So we wanna end up with about 35 grams total starter. So I've got this tiny scale here. We're gonna give this a 1-to-1-to-1 feeding. What that means is that it's 1 part starter, 1 part flour, and 1 part water. So 1-to-1-to-1. In order to end up with 35 grams total, we'll need about 12 grams of each. She can do math on the fly. So I'm just gonna measure 12 grams of starter into this cute little jar. Oh, nailed it. Satisfying. So now that we've established our starter, you have 2 options for what to do with this large jar of starter. One is you could either use it for bread or any other sourdough discard recipe, because from now on we're using this jar as the main jar for pizza dough. Whatever you decide to do, whenever you don't need your starter, just place it in the fridge. To this 12 grams of starter, I'm gonna add 12 grams of water. It's a little bit over, but that's okay, because as we mentioned earlier, you don't have to be exact with starters, because they're beautiful living organisms. So we're just mixing the starter into the water to dilute it. And finally, we've got 12 grams of rye flour to complete our feeding. And we're gonna give it a stir to incorporate. So once that's nicely incorporated, we can just level it out in the jar, which is gonna make it really easy to monitor the starter's growth. I'm just leveling out the top of the starter so that it forms like a nice even horizon line for us to slide the rubber band to, so we can monitor its growth. The first time you give your starter a normal feeding, you wanna keep tabs on how long it takes to peak, which means how long it takes to reach double or even sometimes triple in size, because that's gonna impact how long your total fermentation is gonna take in your dough. I'm gonna do the exact same thing with the pineapple starter, and we're gonna make pizza to see which way of starting a starter is the winner. In case you're taking a break from sourdough baking or you're going on holiday, to put your starter on pause is super easy. First, what we're gonna do is add extra flour to the starter. By eye is fine, you don't need to weigh this out. What we're looking to do is just turn our starter into a thick paste, because as we know, lower hydration slows down fermentation. And basically we're giving our starter a lot of food to nosh on while we're away. So once you've got this lovely thick paste, we're just gonna flatten that out, okay? And then we're going to add more flour on top that we're not going to mix in. So that's just some extra food for the starter. When you don't feed a starter for a while, it develops that vinegary hooch on top. When that happens, the extra flour gets hydrated to feed the starter again, you know? So it's kind of self-feeding. with this method, I've been able to leave my starter without feeding for 3 to 4 months, return to it, and then I would give it a 1-10-10 feed to bring it back to life. Myth busted. You don't have to constantly feed your starter to keep it alive. If your starter hasn't come alive after 7 days, what we're gonna do is first, we're going to have to discard half of it because otherwise we'll start to run out of space in this jar. Once you've discarded half or more, we're going to continue to do it at 25 gram and 25 gram feeding. We're basically just giving the starter a little bit more time to set up house in this flour water mix. Keep doing this for a few more days and you should see signs of life coming to your sourdough starter. If you want to change your rye starter to a white flour starter, because the flour that you use to feed your starter does change the final taste of your dough, it's super easy. So all we have to do is take a little bit of our starter to seed the white flour starter. We've got 2 grams of our rye pineapple starter. We're gonna add 10 grams of water. To that, we're gonna add 10 grams of white flour. So basically, we're giving this a 1-5-5 feeding. First, we have to mix the rye starter into the water, and then we're gonna add 10 grams of white flour. You can use any white flour you like, so we're just gonna stir that in. And then we can adjust the rubber band as usual so we can watch it grow. So now we have a white flour starter, and each time you feed it, it's gonna have less and less of that rye in it over time. For the last bonus tip, I wanted to answer a question that was one of the most liked comments in my sourdough pizza dough video with Gozney, which asked about how to schedule the ferment throughout the whole process of making the pizza dough. So I like to visualize it using any calendar app that you have on hand. For example, if you know your starter takes 4 hours to peak, you can just draw a 4-hour block there. And then you're gonna mix that into your dough. And let's say you know that your bulk ferment takes 8 hours. So create an 8-hour bulk ferment block. And then after that, you transfer it to the fridge. That's chill, you don't have to be on hand for that. And basically why I recommend using an app for this is because now you can slide the fermentation blocks to suit your personal schedule. Because what we don't want is to follow the starter schedule. The starter should follow our schedule. So it's really easy once you have those blocks in your calendar to like figure out, okay, if I wake up at 8, then I'm gonna start my starter at 10, and then my starter will be ready at 2, and then I'll be able to mix that into the dough at 2, and then the bulk ferment will be done at 10. And that's it. That's how you can schedule your sourdough bakes. So we've got our 2 doughs here. Let's have a look at them. Our rye water starter and our rye pineapple starter. And you can definitely see there's a huge difference between the final proof of the 2, where our rye pineapple starter is definitely showing a lot more activity than the water. The recipe for this dough is available on Gozney's YouTube, so just check out the sourdough pizza dough video that we've already made. I think it's gonna be really interesting to see what each of them tastes like as well, so let's make some pizza. The pineapple starter pizza has passed the toss. It's not a real test. All right, so that's our first pizza. And now for our water starter dough. Honestly, this dough is looking a little bit underproofed, but we're just going to make pizza with it anyway and see what happens. I think if I had let this dough proof for 2 to 3 more hours, it would get to the same level as the pineapple starter. That's how you can adjust your proof time so that you always get a good pizza. Like if your dough is underproof, just give it a little bit more time to do the final proof and it'll eventually get there. Just watch out for it over fermenting. Now it's time to sauce up. Harden up. Targeting our basil leaves so that they don't burn in the oven. So we've just baked our first pizza made with our new rye pineapple starter. Now I'm gonna top our rye water starter. It's so interesting for me to work with a starter that is not my usual starter too, because they really are quite different from my tried and tested sourdough buddy. All right, so we've got our 2 pizzas made with our 2 new starters. Let's cut them up and have a taste. Just gotta be more assertive. And for this, I would love to ask Maddie to join me. So Maddie was feeding the starters throughout the week, so it's only right for us to try these pizzas together.
I reckon let's start with
Water?
and then see if we can taste any difference in the pineapple.
He's a man with a master plan. All right, cheers.
I'm definitely getting the sourness through on this.
I like how you went crust first, like that's really professional.
Like a wine connoisseur.
All right, this is our pineapple starter dough. Cheers. If you didn't tell me that this starter was made with pineapple, I wouldn't know.
There's not much of a difference.
Both of them have like that really great sourdough flavor.
The pineapple one tastes a little more developed to me.
Yeah. And it's definitely, when I was stretching it, it was definitely much easier. Like it proofed faster, which is definitely a sign that the pineapple starter is stronger, like more established than the water one. Yeah.
And for all the people that don't like pineapple on pizza, you can get it in a pizza and you can't taste it. It's a win-win.
True that. No one has to know. So I think it's clear which method is the winner here. This fight goes to the rye and pineapple starter. If you are going to start a starter with rye and pineapple juice, after your starter is established, then you can change to water and you don't have to keep feeding it pineapple juice for its entire life. For the recipe, go to gozney.com.
And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel.